Lesson 1.1 is over the contextualization of period one. And at the start of each unit, we will do a short contextualization video giving you an overview of what's going to be coming up in this historical period. The purpose of contextualization is to establish the context for which our historical study will be taking place. So just like you use context when reading to figure out word meanings, you use context in history to figure out the significance and relationship of historical events. So by the end of period one, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the context for European encounters in the Americas from 1491 to 1607. Context is especially important in this course as you will establish that in your paper. When you write any sort of essay or formal paper, you always want to clarify what the context is in your introduction paragraph. So let's take a look at the context for period one. First of all, we're going to be looking at the relationship between environment and native culture. Environment consists of things like climate, soil, and weather, as well as natural resources that exist in different geographic locations. And we're going to look to see how does the type of climate impact the development of native culture. If it's a hot climate, how are cultures different than if it's a damp climate? And how does that change the way Native American groups develop differently in the United States? We're also going to look at how cultures adapted to those climates. Some cultures, their climates allowed them to be nomadic and move from place to place without any permanency. Other cultures developed agriculture based on their climate and became sedentary or stayed in one location. So we'll look at how these cultures differed from each other and what environmental factors made a culture nomadic or sedentary. The next thing we're going to look at is the age of exploration, when Europe began to push its way into the Americas. And we're going to look at the factors that caused the launch of the age of exploration. And it begins with the development of European nation states. At the time of European exploration, these nation states consisted of Spain, France, England, and the Netherlands. And these were relatively new European countries in the 1400s that emerged with a strong national government, almost exclusively under the power of a monarch or a king. And soon these nations began to compete for political and economic dominance with each other. It's this competition that launched exploration as the nation states sought both bragging rights and the economic benefits of acquiring territory overseas. As these nations became more powerful, that also led to changes in Europe as well as changes in the New World. And we'll see the influx of money and material goods that comes into Europe, as well as things like food and animals from the Americas, are going to have a profound effect on European culture as well as American culture. It's going to change the very way that Europe does business. The third thing that we're going to talk about is called the Columbian Exchange. This is a very important vocabulary phrase. The Columbian Exchange refers to the movement of plants and animal and sometimes people, depending on how it's defined, between the Americas and Europe. What we call the New World, which was new to Europeans, and the Old World, which was established nation states in Europe. So we will see plants, animals, and disease, microbes, move between these two cultures with profound effects, not just in the Americas, but also in Europe. Third, we will see how does the Columbian Exchange impact Native American people, but as well as African people. Because as the Native American population, which the Spanish will use for labor, begins to rapidly decline as a result of the Columbian Exchange, the Europeans then focus on Africa and enslavement of African peoples brought to the Americas as their source of labor and the beginning of the slave trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. The fourth theme that we're going to look at in contextualization is how do Native people and the Europeans interact with each other? And at first, there's a struggle to find common ground between these cultures. They speak different languages, have different religions. They just see life completely differently from each other. So as that common ground is sought, sometimes it's successful, but oftentimes it's not. And that leads to attempting to solve problems using both diplomacy, which is peaceful interactions, or conflict. And unfortunately, conflict will be the route that most European nations take when it comes to interacting with Native people who have different cultures. So we will see attacks on Native culture through military means from Europe. But we will also see attacks on Native culture in a more passive way as European goods and European ideas begin to infiltrate Native American cultures, forcing adaptation and change to longstanding Native practices. And sometimes this passive cultural change will have as a profound impact on Native American cultures as the military attacks that were done by the European nations as well. So just as a reminder, as we finish up this lesson, that the goal of it is to establish that context for period one, the context of Native Americans adapting to their environment, Europeans beginning the age of exploration, the Columbian Exchange, which brings these two very different worlds together, and the resulting interaction between Native Americans and Europeans and how and why that occurs. At this point, this concludes the end of our first lecture on lesson 1.1.